earlier because I basically wasn't involved in politics, but at the same time, as I had started working in Left Uni, I started having to come to the terms with my own impairment and the disability that was caused by it. And in many senses, Bob was my guide through both disability politics and coming to terms with what happens when you actually become disabled due to an impairment. And it was both Bob and Eleanor Furman who were my two guides in this. And I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to read this book and do some editing on it, because it not only let me know more about Bob and the history of the movement, but the evolution of his ideas and his history of struggle across so many things. So I'm so happy to be able to be the chair tonight to help people, help Bob and everybody through this presentation. So Bob's book places the struggles for the emancipation of disabled people within the context of Bob's life journey. Bob traces his experience of life, discrimination, and political awakening, both as an individual and as part of a specific social group. This journey links disability politics to a wider left politics within students, disabled peoples, trade unions, and labor movements. The book concludes with a sober commentary of the ongoing struggle against disablement and capitalism. So in the order of tonight, Bob is going to speak first, and then Paul Mackney and Sandra Daniels will speak last. As everyone knows, Bob has been a leading disability activist in Britain for 30 years. He's appeared on TV, he's been a keynote speaker at numerous conferences. He has written numerous articles on disability politics and social oppression. Okay. Paul Mackney was the NATV/UCU General Secretary and has known Bob Williams-Findlay for over 40 years. They first met when they were both speaking at an anti-National Front meeting in Digbeth Civics Hall around 1977. Later in 1983, they both found themselves on the Birmingham and Solihull area Manpower Board of the Manpower Services Commission, representing respectively trade unionists and disabled people. Both resigned at the same time when the Birmingham AMB attempted to suppress statistics which showed extensive racial discrimination in YTS and other government training schemes. Bob inducted Paul in some sort of understanding of the social model of disability. Paul, as president of Birmingham Trades Union Council, was involved in establishing the Birmingham Trade Union Resource Center, which was associated towards the end of the 1980s with the Small Disability Rights Campaign unit that was coordinated by Bob. Now, Sandra, our third speaker, has known Bob for over 20 years. She's a well-known disability activist who is involved in the Direct Action Network and other disability-related campaigns. Sandra has worked for a Birmingham advocacy group, and the last 6 years has seen Bob and Sandra work closely together around DPAC West Midlands, the People's Assembly, Extinction Rebellion, and Left Uni Disabled Members Caucus, as well as other political activities. So we'd like to start tonight with Bob. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. If you've come here tonight expecting to hear one of those stories detailing one person triumph over tragedy, bravely battled against all odds to succeed, may I suggest you save yourself a huge disappointment by leaving now. Tonight is about my life journey set within the context of political struggle. I could have entitled my book, Nothing Special but Quite Unique. Whilst I refuse any association with the label special, I can't deny that, like almost every other human being, there is an unquestionable uniqueness which has played a major role in shaping my life. My uniqueness is probably due to a cocktail of genes, experiences, and influences, which are both known and unknown. From the moment I was brought into existence, my relationship with the world has been largely informed by the fact that I was born with cerebral palsy. My life story, however, has been largely shaped not by the CP, but rather the social and political consequences of being a person with impairment living in society, or to be more precise, a capitalist society geared toward the so-called normality of fully functioning bodies. Disability, I want to argue, is a site of struggle. Disability is not a personal attribute, an indication of an individual non-conformity to this able-bodied normality, but is instead a form of social oppression. It is the nature of society's organized landscape operating socio-political structures within a capitalist economic system supported by cultural values that disable certain social groups. Disability is not only socially constructed through oppressive notions such as normality, it is also socially created by a social landscape that marginalizes people with impairment within or excludes them from mainstream social activities. Disability, therefore, is a social situation created by disablement, the nature of society, and perpetuated by disableism. Disability is a political question. See the Sheldon quotation thread. Tonight I am not here to outline in detail how society oppresses disabled people, but in the time I have, I want to make it clear that my identities as a political activist, an old age pensioner, father, writer, poet, playwright, comedian, and most important of all, a football supporter, will not be fully understood or appreciated without having consideration of my experience of disability. Thread. Now, having almost lost those who want to hear a heroic story about some happy, clappy, disabled person. I probably added to that list others who will no doubt characterize me as either having a chip on my shoulder or as someone representing the type of disabled person who displays signs of being bitter and twisted, being externally characterized in this way is something disabled people are quite familiar with. During my life, I've been referred to in a variety of ways, ranging from that spastic, a cripple, handicapped person, through to a police officer seeking to wind me up by asking a colleague, is it human? When I say I'm a disabled person, I'm not talking about my physical difference. I'm making a political statement, rejecting an imposed identity and embracing an alternative political identity and culture. And in so doing, offering a direct challenge to the oppressive relationship that I and others have with society. In truth, I'm showing utter contempt for society, which remain incapable of accepting disabled people as we are, so far in refusal to dismantle the structural and organizational barriers faced by us. I say utter contempt for society because it isn't just the capitalist classes who practice disableism. The left too are trapped by dominant ideas, often through workerist interpretation of Marx or idealistic vanguard notions of liberating the oppressed, but forgetting all about the question of self-determination. My book, Life Journey, will be all about self-determination of a class, an oppressed section of society, and an individual human being. Where did this life journey begin? Fred. I was born Bob Williams-Findlay on the 25th of January 1951. My mother was a month overdue, and the midwife at a nursing home tried to induce her and ran into difficulties. A 20-mile dash by ambulance ended with an emergency delivery using forceps, which caused brain damage, which resulted in cerebral palsy affecting all four of my limbs and speech. In 1956, I was sent to the drum room at Shipment Home, 30 miles from home, a special school. Then, 8 years later, I was accepted into the A stream at the Thomas Taylor School, Cambridge, run by the Spastic Society. Another special school even further away from home. Here I took part in my academic backbone and achievement. Fred. I hated boarding school, and I'm victimized for being outspoken. My reading of Christy Brown, My Left Foot, an influence on my own book title, and Miller and Green's A Life Apart, began my political awakening. I started to develop socialist ideas, believe disability and capitalism were interconnected, though without an analysis yet. Fred. While I was another spastic institution, my father died and I became ill. I had to leave. My girlfriend at the time sent me a letter from Paul Hunt, which appeared in the Guardian in September 1972. And now I've lost my place. I made contact, met him, and the rest is now history. Paul was instrumental in establishing the Union of the Physically Impaired against segregation. Until I left Oakwood, I was only periodically exposed to the public gaze and looks of disapproval. Nevertheless, it made me feel self-conscious of my difference when subjected to his look, the finger pointing, and strangers laughing at me in the street. When I was involved in mainstream activity, I soon realized I entered an unknown world inherited by non-disabled people, a world I was in truth ill-equipped to deal with at the time. Much of my left foot is in part concerned with my political awakening and developing social consciousness. Fred. A number of chapters concerning my exploit at the University of Essex and student politics. I joined the International Marxist group in 1973 and have stayed a Marxist ever since. When I was sent down from Essex, I found my way to Birmingham, a centre for contemporary cultural studies, and Westbourne Albion, the football club. Some may not be aware that my background in theory isn't with disability, but racism. Along with Paul Gilroy, I helped set up the Race and Politics subgroup who wrote The Empire Strikes Back, Race and Racism in 1970 Britain. Fred. It was over a decade after the first contact I had with the embryonic disabled people movement that I returned to the struggle. After two incidents of discrimination, I set about forming a new Disabled People Organisation, the Birmingham Disability Rights Book. I already knew that it was important to recognise intersectionality of my origins. Fred, like so. Using the generic term disabled people does not mean that I do not recognise differences in experiences within the group, but in exploring this, we should start from ways of pressure, differentiating the impact on different groups of people, while the differences in experience among individuals with different impairments. With a few absences here and there, I've been involved in disability policy at local, national and international level for 36 years. My greatest disappointment, as I've already said, is the failure of the left to see disability oppression more visible in left politics. The left understanding of the politics of disability is extremely poor. Ernest Mandel was one of the few non-disabled Marxists to even engage with the issue. Many of the left's theories, policies and practice exclude disabled people and therefore, albeit unintentionally, collude in their oppression. Left at best reflect social democracy's paternalism and still struggle with developing inclusive practice. Fred. I want to close with a quotation from a colleague of mine from the International Disabled People Movement, Sandra Webster. As long as we regard our impairments as tragedies, we will be pitied. As long as we feel ashamed of who we are, our life will be regarded as useless. As long as we remain silent, we will be told by others what to do. During my teens, probably not consciously, I embarked down a road that meant I was never going to be silent. Well, not for long anyway. More than a left vote bear witness to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Wonderful. Paul, I'll let you know what's happening inside the chat, okay? Okay.
You want me to go?
Yes, please. I'll just let you tell you time in the chat.
Okay. Bob only lets you know on the last page of his book that when you meet him for the first time, you might find him pushy. You might find that he says what he believes needs saying, but his bark is worse than his bite. Bob had a major impact on my political development in the way I saw the world, and he introduced me. I can remember him introducing me to the social model because I wasn't clear what he was talking about. And I can't remember whether he took my glasses off or he told me to take my glasses off. But once I'd taken them off, then I was extremely myopic. I've had operations since. He said, look, you're not as disabled, in inverted commas, with your glasses on. It's to do with how society relates to you. Anyway, I formed a fairly basic view of disability politics and so on from that. As has been said, I met Bob first at a meeting against the National Front, which was held in these dreadful rooms of Digby Civic Hall, which people in the 70s used to meet in, but which actually often had great power. You could have a group of shop stewards meet there on a Saturday, and on the Monday, all the factories were closed. Unfortunately, it's not the same anymore. I remember him, I became president of Trades Council. We swept out a racist president who talked about people coming to this country and living on the treacle stick.
Ooh.
And first it was Maurice Ludmer, by the way, who was the editor of Searchlight. I then became president, and whenever Bob indicated he wanted to speak, I must confess I always called him because he always had something different to say, and I can still remember some of them. He may or may not. There was a motion about the swimming baths and provision for disabled people. I think it was in Sutton Coldfield, and the way he worked it into making the whole room believe that actually this was one of the most important aspects of the socialist transformation of society at the time, and it worked. Similarly, in a very sensitive debate about time limits on abortion rights, he got up and explained some of the complexities of termination as it relates to disabled people. I also remember him speaking on Ireland when very few people had the courage to speak on Ireland, especially in Birmingham, where you'd had the bombings. Anyway, I find myself on the area manpower board of the Manpower Services Commission for the trades unions, even though our position as a trades council was that the trades union shouldn't be on there, but as long as the TUC decided that we should be on there, they were going to make sure I was on there. And I put up arguments for the need for, God knows what we called it at the time, probably an equal opportunities policy, I suspect. And Bob, I got Bob co-opted to represent disabled people. And he made a fantastic impact. He may not be aware of it. And it's a shame in a sense that the impact was made there and not in some other places. But in theory, that was the body was supposed to be arranging life for a lot of young people. I remember in particular when they came very proudly and gave us these glossy booklets which explained all the different types of disabilities, in inverted commas, people could have. And Bob was furious because he said, I'm described here as walking like a reeling drunk. Would you like to be described in that way? And the MSC pulped the lot. They must have spent thousands of pounds, and as a result of Bob's contribution, they were pulped, and there was a beginning of a move towards a different point of view. As he says, he then got involved in, I forgot what it's called, disability rights, someone will tell me, in Birmingham. Geraldine, I think, who was the president of the Trades Council after me, was the chair of it. I just want to say, after I read the book, I wrote what I thought, and I'm going to read it out. It may seem a bit stilted because I'm reading it, but more than a left foot, it's not just an autobiography of a bloke called Bob, who was born with cerebral palsy and became a fully engaged, passionate advocate for respecting equality, quality, and access. To be sure, it looks at his early home life, which is fascinating, his experience of segregated education, which, as you can hear, was not a happy one. His finding himself at university. By finding himself, I mean, clearly that was a major area of development. The chapter or chapters or long chapter, I can't remember, on Essex. and his subsequent emergence as an articulate champion of disabled people, a battler for a better world, but coming from a Marxist perspective. Each chapter narrates the interaction of disabled people in psychological, sociological, spiritual, philosophical, and above all, political spheres since the Second World War. His life story is interwoven with the evolution of what is a very profound level of thinking on how society relates to disabled people in the population. He's got a very restless intellect, and the bit I liked that I wrote was, no suspect stone is left unturned. In fact, he not unfrequently tortures himself about the accuracy of his own judgments. But these matters are never abstractly academic or mere commentary. They emerge from and in turn develop Bob's astute activism. And the result is a book which has considerable warmth and humour. It will stimulate you, it will challenge you to rethink some of your most common sense beliefs. And clearly for Bob, disability politics, and of course his life isn't only about disability politics, it's about challenging the way society as a whole. But disability politics is about changing social relations in order to facilitate people with impairments in engaging with society and becoming agents for change. I'm just going to have a quick look here, see if I missed out anything. I'm sure there were other things I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, there were times when Bob must have felt, to use a biblical phrase, a bit like a voice in the wilderness or a prophet. But disabled people in recent years have begun to speak much more collectively and for themselves. And it's good to have seen at the beginning of DPAC that Bob was there as it was founded, and his thinking, I'm sure, will inform people fighting for a better future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Paul. Okay. Now we have Sandra. If I can get her to
I think I've done
Sandra,
that.
Can you unmute yourself?
I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Wonderful. Thank you, love.
Hi there. Yeah. Hi there, everyone. I'm so pleased to be involved in launching Bob's book. Talking about the book, some people may be wondering why Sandra Daniels, me, is on the front cover. I did myself, but the reason is quite straightforward. Bob wanted an image that was symbolic, one that showed him in action, wearing his team hat alongside somebody he's had a long-standing friendship with. I'd like to tell you where the photo was taken and the events surrounding it. The photo was taken at Disabled People Against the Cuts protest at the Tory Party conference in 2016. Bob and I, as DPAC West Midlands coordinators, wanted to show the Tories they were not welcome in Birmingham. After all, this was the city where DPAC was born back in 2010. DPAC was formed as a response to the election of the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition government and their plans to reduce the welfare state. On the 6th anniversary, the pair of us wanted to invite disabled activists to our city and have a ball. This wasn't just any old ball either. The photo shows Bob outlining the story behind our protest. Let me give you a flavour of what was said and done. I'll explain who the relevant characters are afterwards. Disabled people held the Cinderella role ever since the evil witch's spell cast them into shadows of society. Cinderella was often locked away, forgotten and left to make baskets that no one saw. One day, a fairy godmother paid Cinderella a visit and told her her life didn't have to be like that. She promised to help Cinderella go to the ball, but in order to break the spell of the evil witch completely and free herself from the wicked stepmother and wicked stepsisters, Cinderella would have to find a magic key, which was called Article 19. So the plan for Cinderella to have a ball involved a host of characters and objects. Our Grimm fairy tale involved Aladdin, who was George Osborne, Alibaba, the banking system, Big Bad Wolf, Theresa May, Cinderella, disabled people, the evil witch, the economic social system, Genie, austerity, the emperor was David Cameron, and the fairy godmother, disability rights. The magic key was the UN Convention of the Rights of Disabled People, Article 19. And the wicked stepmother and stepsisters were the disabling barriers, things like the labour market and access and transport, to name just a few. Our ball involved a series of actions which set about leaving our calling card along Colmore Road. It included popping into recently renovated shops that still had a step, demonstrating at Snow Hill railway station around the proposal to get rid of the guards on the train, and then we marched just round the corner and straight onto the tram lines, stopping the trams going in and out of Birmingham New Street Station to highlight the issues that disabled people were still having accessing transport. So after causing havoc for a while, we headed to the National Convention Centre to confront some unsuspecting Tories at their conference. Later on in the week, Bob and I took on a more formal role as stewards for the People's Assembly and their march. Bob's book explains why he was there on that day, but what about me? I've been a disabled activist for 25 years. My disability political awareness started with a parking ticket in Solihull. I'd parked in a space only the week before, but this time I had a parking ticket. Apparently, lines had been painted on the curb to make the area a drop-off point only, and I hadn't seen them. I decided that I was not going to pay the ticket fine and ended up being threatened with arrest. But due to the local police getting involved, the parking ticket was stopped, which I thought was a bit of a victory. But it also meant that they contacted my local social services department. This resulted in a phone call with a social worker who put me in touch with a user involvement group in the area where I lived. I became a member of the group, but it didn't take long before I began to feel like a fish out of water. So I left and became involved with the two disabled people's organisations that Bob was the founder member of. That was the Birmingham Disability Rights Group and the Birmingham Disability Resource Centre. My political development was what soon saw me progressing to help organise Disabled People's Direct Action Network, which was a militant campaign group for accessible transport and issuing calls for disabled people to be freed from institutionalised care. I remember having a conversation with Bob around about that time as we left the Disability Resource Centre. It concerned the number plate on my new motability vehicle, which incorporated the letters DDA. The Disability Discrimination Act had just been passed. I moved away from the DRC and started working in the advocacy field and ended up getting a paid position at People First Birmingham. During my time at People First Birmingham, I would attend meetings and conferences where our paths would cross. It was always good to see Bob, and we always found ourselves working together to steer conversations in the same direction. It was, however, the establishment of DPAC West Midlands that saw Bob and I begin to work closer together. So Bob and I share many life experiences that have impacted similarly on our lives. For instance, we both attended special school and as a consequence faced disconnection from our local neighbourhoods. Bob, being a boarder, was separated from his family unit, as you've heard. We often make reference to the fact we managed to escape a life of institutionalised care. Our life experiences have made us determined and strong advocates for building inclusive communities that will support disabled people to have choice and control to live independently within society. Similar to Bob, I've also been involved with mainstream politics and found the left far from inclusive. As a disabled woman, I found a lack of awareness around intersectional issues. Within many campaigns, access is not addressed, and there is a tendency to speak for disabled people rather than allowing our views to be heard. Disabled women have specific issues that are largely ignored. So Bob's book is entitled More Than a Left Foot. And over the last 5 years, I've seen our friendship develop and evolve outside of the political arena. So we both enjoy films and going to the theatre and music. And once when visiting Liverpool, we were prevented from going on the Mersey ferry. So ended up visiting the John Lennon and Yoko exhibition, which we both thought was absolutely fantastic. It's really good. Our adventures also include being threatened with arrest outside New Scotland Yard and debating whether or not to upend the BBC political editor on the platform of Westminster Underground, and visiting a butterfly farm on one of the hottest summer days on record. Only we could choose to do that. What should be clear to people now is why I'm with Bob on the book cover and why we call ourselves partners in crime.
Thank you so much, Sandra. As people have seen, hopefully, I've put out the raise hand function is on the participant screen. And I want to first ask Sandra Webster, who's from Paisley in the Scottish Socialist Party. I'd like to welcome her, and I know she's written one of the reviews of Bob's book that have appeared and on the Socialist Resistance webpage, and it's a wonderful review. And we would like Sandra, if she'd like to, this is Sandra Webster, to say something, and I know she has a question. So Sandra, let me make sure that I'm lowering your hand, and can you unmute yourself? I hope she can do it. All right, I've lost her. Hi, Sandra. Hi. Okay, Sandra, I need you to unmute yourself. You even disappeared.
You've got it.
There you are.
Got it.
Thank
Here I
you.
am.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi, Bob, and thanks very much. I loved your book. It was absolutely fantastic. And I really loved how you described your life, how your life was with really modern sociology, a lot of which I haven't read and I've been delving into. I have an impairment myself. My two sons have impairments. And I have been, like you, involved in disability issues for a long time, you know, quite quietly helping people with forums and the bureaucracy. We have, for example, as you know, I'm dreading after COVID what's going to happen. You know, we're going to get hammered, people with impairments and people who care for them. And how do we offer support? I think the left have a huge issue with this. You know what I mean? How do we offer support to people? How do we put people into positions of authority or power? It shouldn't just be top down. I mean, I can remember attending one of my ECs when I was a member of it, and a disabled person, you know, people were talking over him. But when I was writing the review, I remembered what happened. He was so assertive, and he got his point across in a gentle way, and I really liked it. Also, I was intrigued by the title, More Than a Left Foot, because more than you know, blackfacing at the moment has been shamed as it should have been. But I remember in the 80s talking to some drama students who were in doing a workshop in the Centre for Independent Living where I lived, where I worked then, and they thought blackfacing was terrible. But okay, My Left Foot, the film, Daniel Day-Lewis, great. Okay, people said he was great. He won an Oscar, but there was a lot of outcry at that time from people like Nabil Shaman and Theatre Grey, who're still going, about why did they feel the need not to have an actor with an impairment? Rather, you know, that's still acceptable, and I don't think it's acceptable. So anyway, I'll just carry on bantering in my wee part of Scotland and the left, and hopefully we'll have some left unity and talk about this. And hopefully I'm writing a review for our party's paper as well. I haven't finished the review. My son's in dialysis at the moment, so I haven't got a lot of time on my hands, but I will write a full review soon. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed tonight. It's been a pleasure to read your book. Thank you so much. I learned so much.
Thank you.
Bob, do you want to have, I have 2 more people so that we can do a short thing, or do you want to respond to everyone directly?
No, take 2 more.
Okay, excellent. All right, the next person that I have is Dave Kellaway. Dave, can you unmute?
Yeah. Hi, Bob. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's been a privilege to be able to relate to this book by writing a review for the book. And as I say in the review, I think it's very important, the book, because it provides a way, one way, in which the left as a whole can begin to catch up on these debates, particularly the whole final part of the book, the third part of the book. I would also like to say, before I ask my question, that Bob obviously didn't have time to talk about the events in Essex, which I participated in to some extent with Bob. And people should realise this was a very big thing at the time. There was thousands of students involved in Essex. Bob was a key leader in organising the picket at the university and various occupations. And he also paid a price because the university pursued him relentlessly. I mean, not just through the university disciplinary procedures, but also the police took out a criminal prosecution against Bob, which could have resulted in imprisonment. I mean, it was a serious thing. They tried to get him for criminal damage. And I remember attending the trial with Bob, and it was great to read that in the book, because I remember the meal in the Indian restaurant afterwards where we sang Internationale. I remember Mike Mansfield, early on in those days for Michael Mansfield, getting up and saying, look, there are 19 contradictions in this prosecution. At that point, I thought we might win, because I thought 19 contradictions are going to be difficult for the Crown prosecution to beat. But anyway, it was very important. I think, obviously, as Bob recognises, the experience in Red Essex, like for all of us who was at Essex, I think did form us politically. It did provide a magnificent school of not just Marxists, but in general intellectual and political training for our whole lives. And I think that's reflected in the fact that Bob has remained a Marxist. And what's impressive, I think, in the final part, and it's quite tough reading at times, because Bob quite regularly had to come into conflict with the people working in these institutions, local institutions or otherwise. And I think one of the interesting aspects you could write a whole book on is what do you do working as a radical within the local state and within institutions? How do you intervene? I think that's a very interesting thing. But my question is this. I noticed in a recent Facebook post, Bob, that you talked about the problems of the social care debate, because the social care debate is going to be a crucial debate, not just for the left, but for the whole of society. It's obvious that the Tories are going to come up with a plan, Labour are going to come up with plans, because obviously the COVID crisis has exposed all this. And therefore, you were quite critical of just simple calls for nationalisation or taking back into public control the social care system. I'd like to, if you could elaborate a bit more on that, it'd be really, really great. I hope Baggies make it into the Premier League.
Thank you, Dave. Can Marion please unmute yourself? Marion, I've lost you. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay.
Oh, lovely. Well, it's wonderful tonight to catch up on 50 years. I've known Bob for 50 years, and Dave Kellaway as well. And I noticed that Roland's in the meeting as well, and I've known him not quite so long, but almost as long. But I haven't met up with any of you physically for many, many years, which left me with a little bit of a quandary when it came to writing the introduction that Bob very kindly asked me to pen for him. So I thought, well, the only thing I can really do is talk about my own experience of Bob as a friend, and the experiences, the very grounding experiences that we all had at Essex. Now, I won't go into that again because David's already more or less covered that. But just to say, really, it's a marvellous pleasure to be here tonight, and all the very, very best, Bob. It's a wonderful book. And when you reread it, because the first time I read it, it was a rush. You know, it was like, I must read this so that I can sort out the intro, but rereading it at leisure, you see more in it every time. I also caught your lovely review, David, the other day on Facebook, which kind of got me further into the book than I'd otherwise been. In a way, I've missed out on all those years where Bob's been a disability activist, but I don't think of Bob simply as a disability activist, and I'm sure none of you do either. We all know there's a lot more to Bob than that. But interestingly, I do think right at the moment with COVID-19 coming into play, you touched on it, David, we're facing a situation now where there are all kinds of rather deviant redefinitions of vulnerability. I think you've been having a go at those on Facebook, Bob, quite rightly as well. And we're really all at a new juncture, thinking about disability, vulnerability, social care, segregation almost in new ways. And as an older person now, I must say it touches me in a different way than it would have done when I was, you know, a young student able to sort of run from the police on a picket line, which I'm not so able to do anymore. And probably was a little bit insensitive at times. I think probably most of us were, to the situations Bob confronted when he was facing the police, the university authorities. He didn't, well, he had backup, he had our friendship, and he had his comrades, and he had his political principles, but he didn't really have much more than that. And when I think back to that, I think I admire Bob more now than I did at the time, because you never appreciate things when you're very young, do you, in a way? Sorry, I'll shut up now because I'm rambling on a bit, but just want to say it's been lovely to catch up, and we'll keep in touch. And I really hope the book's a big success. Thank you very much, Bob, and all the best.
Cheers.
Okay, Bob, why don't you respond to that? I'll put Terry, I believe Mark Leach also wants to speak. So you can do those three, and since they're mostly around your earlier university experiences.
Okay, first of all, Sandra, my mum was a pastry girl, so it's like coming full circle. Now I was not brought up in Scotland. Paisley does have a place in my heart. I used to wear loads of shirts with the Paisley pattern on it. But getting back to politics, I think one of the issues that has always been a disabling barrier for disabled people is that, of course, many of us are economically disenfranchised by the system. Therefore, when it comes to self-organisation, we lack the financial means to self-organise, and the barriers just compound the isolation. So I think we have to look at ways of creating new communities of disabled people, use social media more savvy than I think we are at the moment. I think we need to try and find ways of getting our allies to actually support us in financial way better than historically have been the case. Yes, I agree with Dave. It was very informative for me in my life, not just politically, but as a human being. The issue of where we're at, the left is very much keen on local government and local democracy. I do understand that, but I think we can build community-based services without having to have a traditional local authority power that is quite oppressive. And don't forget, I used to be a planning officer in the Birmingham Social Services Department. I've never met a bunch of arrogant bastards in all my life, and they still are, in my opinion, real oppressors of other people, children, and disabled people. And some of the worst abuses of young people have been in local authority care. So why the hell would we want to go back to that? What we want is a new form of organisation and structures where communities and people at youth services can work together. Now, obviously, when you're older, you're more likely to have ill health and impairment, so you need more, if you like, NHS support. But you don't want your life dominated by a medical discord, and the idea of integrating social care and health, I think, is just a recipe for letting Trump and co run private residential care in Britain. So no, what we do need is to develop a better understanding of independent living. It doesn't mean you do it all yourself, but it is, as I said in my introduction, about self-determination. And even if you're an older person with dementia, you still got a right to determine what you want to eat or wear, or that the memories that you've had are used to inform your day-to-day living. That's what independent living means. Finally, bringing Marion, it felt like a Colchester IMG meeting with Dave, Marion, and myself. And I think living in 5 Glastonbury Marion was a really good experience, and that my appreciation of cultural Marxism is actually very much influenced by Marion.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Terry now, and I believe that Mark Leach has a question for you. And there's also a wonderful discussion with your friend Ellen Holdsworth in the chat. But let's start with Terry. Terry, can you unmute yourself?
Have done.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you everybody for tonight, and thank you to Bob not only for tonight but for writing the book. I certainly learned a lot working on the book with Bob, not only about disability politics, about Bob, but about my own relationship with my own impairments. Susan said something similar, and I think it was a journey for both of us, and those are journeys that are always ongoing and developing. And I wanted to raise 2 things. One is, and Dave mentions it in his review, you didn't talk at all tonight about the creative side of yourself, Bob, and it seems to me that's one of the really deep textures that comes out in the book, and I think is something that the left in England, not the left in other parts of the British state and not the left in other parts of the world, are bad at talking about, is the importance of political culture as a way of engaging people in political ideas and political radicalisation. And I'd be interested for you to say more about that. But the second thing I wanted to say was about the left and disability politics. It seems to me that, I mean, you talk a lot about intersectionality, but it does seem to me that the disabled people's movement, or the position of disabled people in capitalist society, is different to that of any other oppressed group, because we have this weight of not only the idea of being pitied, but of all these charities that claim to speak for us and disempower us in the process of doing so. And I think that the left has never really taken that on board as, you know, I think the left understands much better why, you know, we don't allow the Women's Institute to be the organisation that speaks for feminists. We don't let organisations of well-meaning white people who say that racism isn't very nice to speak for the black movement, but yet we allow organisations that are not of disabled people, that are not even led by disabled people, to corner the market in a supposed dialogue about discourse about disability. And I think I'm going to be the first person to say it tonight, but nothing about us without us, which I think is one of the most powerful slogans any part of the left has ever come up with. And and actually everybody, whether or not they have an impairment, ought to really think about that.
Mark Leach, can you unmute yourself? I know you put a question up in the chat, but if you would like to ask it, that would be great. If not, I can just read it to Bob if you want. And I've lost him. Oh no. Okay. All right. Oh, there he is. Okay. Can you unmute, Mark? I know you had a.
Yeah. So the question I've got is, how do we, with intersectionality, how do we work with other groups to make a fully inclusive society? I'm thinking more about, you know, the fact you're a West Brom fan and I'm a Burnley fan, and I see an aeroplane flying over a ground, which was never appropriate. But how do we work with our allies to make sure that we get what we need?
Okay, thank you. The next person I have is 1 minute. Okay, Alan, I know that you can't raise your hand. Alan, would you like to say something? Alan?
You have to say which Alan, Susan.
Oh, Alan H. Sorry, Alan H.
Hi, Bob.
Holdsworth. Okay. Okay.
Hi to Bob, and congratulations on your book. And you know, we've had like lots of arguments over the years. And one of the questions I put in the chat was, I remember like in the early days, you, I don't know, probably wrote about 1 million words about why we should be called people with disabilities, and the other people were going for disabled people, and eventually the international whatever came out with people with disabilities. Are you happy with that, or are you not happy with that? But also, I think just from a general discussion point of view, I think that, you know, we can talk about macro politics in terms of Marxism, socialism, and capitalism, right? But in the end, we have to deal with communities, right? We have to deal with our neighbors, and we have to break all of that down into sort of real things like lifts on buses, right? Or like getting people out of nursing homes, you know? And it doesn't really, you know, that stuff can motivate us, but how do you think that the Marxist kind of ideology helps to create activists rather than just political thinkers?
Thank you. Okay, Campbell, you're next. Can you unmute yourself? Oh, okay, I can unmute you. Campbell, please go.
Yes, well, actually, I remember one of the few occasions when the left did have, there was any sort of serious discussion about something like, was at one Scottish Socialist Party conference. As it happened, the one that took place immediately after Sheridan's resignation as convener, there was some discussion on a motion on people with disabilities, and in particular, there was one clause in it that we support the 2020 campaign. This was a few years ago, that there's a target by 2020 that there should be all people with disabilities should be integrated into mainstream education, and that there was we should be an end to special education. This motion was, however, narrowly defeated. It was defeated, I think, by interventions from two angles. From some teachers who wanted the ability to exclude difficult pupils under some circumstances, but there was also intervention actually from some people with disabilities who felt that special education could be useful under some circumstances. There was two groups in particular, that is deaf pupils and pupils on the autistic spectrum, that special education could actually be more useful for them. What do people think about these issues?
Thank you, Campbell. Excuse me, Bob, would you like to respond to them and then have this two speakers after? We have Anna and Emma. Would you like to come in now, or do you want to wait to the other two?
I'm coming now. I'm not going to do justice to everybody that spoke. Recognise that fact. First of all, yeah, I think Marxism is important because as a historical materialist, I've actually looked at the history of how people with impairment got treated in different historical moments, and even in the lifetime of the British disabled people movement, the situation has changed. For example, the social model that was developed by my father in the 70s and 80s is not looking at the current issue that are facing disabled people today. The methodology is sound, but the nature of disableism isn't exactly the same as it was. It's not static, and neither is the idea behind disability politics. Because when I spoke about a person with a disability or as a disabled person, I actually had a similar framework. That is, I didn't like disabled people at the time because I felt dominant idea was that we were completely framed by the dominant view of what it was to be disabled, i.e. written off. Whereas someone like John Stuart Mill, he talked about women with disabilities, meaning that they had imposed on them certain disenfranchisement. So it will depend what kind of meaning you have behind that language that you use. I also think that intersectionality is important, and there are differences, and I could spend all night talking about how a historical materialist disagree with postmodernist theories of disability or feminist ideas on disability. But at a practical level, what COVID-19 did is cause two contradictory phenomena. First of all, it actually isolated us in our homes, so in a way that was almost like a reflection of the reality that most disabled people face. And also, it actually led to more community being built around to support people. I think if we're going to go forward, then we've got to learn how to build community. We've got to look at what we've got in common, as well as the differences that we have. And we've got to recognise that there is a common enemy. The bastard Tories or the bastard Republican or whoever is the dominant political power that is protecting global capitalism. And what I haven't talked about tonight, is that we're facing all kinds of crises, economic, social, and ecological. So unless we have a green-red revolution. And I think we're all going to be screwed. So it's about working out what the commonalities are and realizing that, yes, oppression does affect them differently, but there are certain bedrock reasons why we're oppressed, and we've got to attack them. Normality, male and white supremacy are all part of this dominant ideology to keep us structured in our place.
All right, there we are. Thanks a lot, Bob. That was really good. We have Anna Galpin, if she couldn't, yes, and then Emma. And I believe that we have Sue Ellsgood has something, and if that's okay, we can end with that. So she has, so let's go with Ann Galpin, then Emma, and then there's a question from Sue Ellsgood. So, and okay.
Hello, Bob. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to bring solidarity to Bob and thank him very much for the book from TUC Disabled Workers Committee. Bob's spoken to us, spoken at disabled workers conferences and joined us at many events over the years, and it's always you've always helped me to understand a historical perspective of before I became active as a disabled activist, as it were. And I think it's really important that your book is published now at this time, because as you were talking about the COVID, the new realities, and we need to keep the history and the struggle in our mind, so that to help us, to empower us to come together to fight collectively and in solidarity again. Because it is, I've seen a draft preview of a new Inclusion London interim report into COVID, which they're launching tomorrow, and it backs up a lot of what people are saying, and we're hearing from disabled members, trade unionists across the 4 small island nations, that the isolation and the precariousness of which we're increasingly being pushed and forced and told to DNR and give back our feeding tube and our breathing tube, and I've had a very long day, wanted to not miss this occasion to join you, Bob, and to send solidarity to everyone. I'll bow out. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, you were very, I'm sorry you stopped because it was very interesting. I'm sorry. Okay, Emma, can you go? And then it's been suggested that we let Bob, Sandra, and Paul have their concluding remarks, but they're going to first. Bob is going to respond to you, and then we can have. Thank you so much. So Emma, if you can,
yeah, all done.
Okay, thank you.
Super. Hi, Bob. Brilliant book. Thank you. I just wanted to ask, there's systemic disableism, as we can all see, rooted throughout the left and rooted through a lot of the different marginalised groups that intersect to form the left. Like as a younger, I guess, disabled campaigner, one of the things that I always find banging my head against is this systemic disableism and finding a way to get my voice heard, to get our voices heard, when we're so easily written off as being hysterical, where that sexism intersects, and not worth listening to and not really worthy of the left's time. You've been doing this for a long while. Do you have any sort of advice for getting our voices heard or do we need to go further? Do we need to revolt against the left as it stands? Okay. Thank you.
One minute. Okay, Bob, thank you. Bob, would you like to respond to them, and then we can go for yourself and Paul and Sandra's concluding remarks. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Just to take Emma's point first, I think the way we deal with the left is to imagine as disabled people that we are their parents and they are teenagers. And what that means is that we cut them some slack so they can learn from their errors, but actually ground them when they get older and we bring them into line. So I see that a bit like teenagers. They got a lot to learn even now. And yeah, a few weeks now, Sandra and I have been toe to toe with many centre-left activists, and I'm afraid we have to shout and scream, otherwise we won't be heard. And it is about recognising that we are marginalised and excluded often. And the report coming out tomorrow from Inclusion London really brings that home in a real way. But let me remind you that 4 years ago, I was actually saying to people, the period we are in now reminds me of the Weimar Republic, when the Social Democrats and the Conservatives and later the Fascists went on a eugenics campaign, beginning with disabled people and ended up with the Holocaust. We have to realize that history doesn't repeat itself. As such, an element of the past can be revisited in the present. And one of the biggest fights we got at the moment, non-disabled and disabled people, is fighting the fascists and the far right, be it in Britain, America, or globally.
Thank you so much, Bob. Fred is going to make some announcements. This is something that's coming up on the 2nd of July, which I'm hoping people can see, where Bob and Sandra and several other comrades will be speaking.
Yes, so I've put up the card there, and it's a facebook.com social work future. That's a way it'll be live streamed, and if anybody wants it to be emailed to them, then just put put your email up on the. What I'll do is I'll send this out to everybody who's registered, so you'll get the invitation directly to yourselves. And it's on the 2nd of July. Nothing about us without us. Our lives in our hand. With Bob again and some disabled rights activists. There you are. Hand it back to Paul and to Sandra to conclude.
Paul or Sandra, would you like to make a conclusion before we... would you like, oh, Bob, do you want to say something? No, okay. So let's, go ahead, Bob, if you want to do a conclusion, and then we can send it to Paul and Sandra, see if they want to end it, okay? Okay, all right. Did you want to say something, Bob?
No.
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. This is me. Okay, Sandra, Paul, would you like to say anything? I
Yep.
don't know if he's still here. Yes, there you are. Thank you.
Before the election, I was writing an election song about we'll all be voting Labour to a traditional tune. And I was struggling for a rhyme and a verse that started no more food banks, no more poor, to get a rhyme with universal credit. And I ended up, and I thought it was slightly forced at the time, no more care homes to be dreaded. It's turned out, unfortunately, to be very prophetic, because what we've actually seen is a cull of people, not just who are old, but people with impairments. What impairments have been called in the last few weeks is underlying conditions, or some of them. And I think people will look back on what's happened, 30,000 people dying in care homes who probably didn't need to, in the same way that people look back on the Irish famine or whatever, a government which hasn't thought about what it's doing. And out of this, we're going to have to fight really hard to find a way to build something which we want to see. But finally on Bob, I mean, I got this quote I use from time to time, but my memory isn't as good as it used to be. Walter Benjamin said, the writer's mission is not to report, but to struggle, not to play the spectator, but to intervene actively. That described Bob.
Thank you.
Sandra, would you like to say something?
Yeah, we're living in very dangerous times as to be a disabled person, and I mean I'm saying elderly people in the word disabled people, and so we really do need to, as a community, unite. We need to educate the left more, and the left need to start to give disabled people the opportunity to lead, and they need obviously to be our allies. And I think that we need to start to look at how we work with the left on that. Instead of the left leading, we need to be leading, and they need to be the allies. And I think we need to start to talk about how that happens, because I think sometimes people find it difficult to do. For disabled people, we need to come together, because we need to, talk together, and we need to come up with coordinated plans. And, Bob is somebody who I feel I can do that with, along with other people in the disabled community. So I think we've got to become stronger, and we've got to use social media to do that.
Can we hear what Sue?
That's fine. That's what I wanted to know. Okay, Sue, can you like to say something? Sue?
Hi, Bob. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just it was just a point of interest, really, because this book is partly about your personal journey, as well as all the activism. But I was just wondering whether you had experienced internalized depression and how you overcame that and dealt with that.
Okay, I can deal with that and actually go back to what Terry said, because often the way I deal with my own internalized depression is to write poetry, to write plays, to get it out of my system and make it visible. And, you know, people like the top black and otherwise, and how when I went to Birmingham, I meant to write about Kafka, and I was Benjamin with very much into Kafka. I think about Kafka writing is an allegory. So he actually uses stories that have a political content to them. So as people, I think people often question, do disabled people have a culture? I say yes, but we're still trying to work out what it is, because on the one hand, disability is about the social restriction that we face that are imposed on us because we have impairment. But if we didn't have impairment, then we wouldn't be disabled people, because we wouldn't face the barrier we do. So impairment and disability are not the same, but they do have a relationship, just as, you know, women oppression is about the fact that women are women. And we must not forget that fact, that the uniqueness of an individual often leads to them being part of a social group that is oppressed and disabled people, because of the way society sees us, talks about us, treat us. We internalize that we find it very hard to actually, you know, stick our fingers up and say, fuck you, we're not going to be described the way you want us to be. And that is all about disability culture, where disability culture and disability policy come together. And, you know, building community is the base on which we can go forward. That's it.
Thank you, Bob. I want to thank everybody for coming and participating. I want to thank Bob again for this wonderful, wonderful book. Thank you, Sandra and Paul, and thank you everyone for your wonderful comments. I don't know, academics are boring and that's where my history is, but yay for Bob. Thank you. Hurrah, hurrah. Thank you, Bob.